Like I really believed that these were all just coming out of the first major Dark Age peoples after
Yeah.
the Bronze Age.
Like you didn't buy Chris Pine 100 years ago. It's
Yeah, not even 100. He couldn't even do 100. These people are doing 2,600, yo.
all right. Hail Toddo.
What's going on?
We got a podcast, The Buff and the Blazer. If I was a listener, where would I go to find more?
You can check us out on our website, thebuffandtheblazer.com. Drew over there writes a article that goes along with every single episode.
You can find all kinds of little extras on the articles, and you can listen to the podcast right there. Also, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, we're on Twitter at Buff and Blazer. Follow us there.
Get those clicks, people.
The Buff and the Blazer.
Welcome to episode 48 of the Buff and the Blazer podcast, the show where we discuss and break down films past and present. I'm Drew, and as always, I'm here with my good pal, Mr. El Toddo.
What's up, dude?
What's up, man?
How's it going?
Happy Saturday.
Happy Sabado.
Slogging through another one.
Yep.
We're going to do something a bit different this week.
Getting a little international flavor.
Yeah, this is our first foreign film that we have.
Parasite.
Is it? Oh, yeah, that's right, Parasite. Well, maybe one of the more obscure foreign films, I guess you could say, this week. We're discussing a film called The Legend of Tomiris, directed by Akan Satayev. That's the best I can do.
Sagdiev.
Yeah.
Borat
Sure.
Sagdiev.
So we're going back to Kazakhstan after a week on hiatus. So, actually, let's start off a little bit differently. Let's kind of introduce everyone just like real quickly in terms of what this film deals with, like the topic, the people, which are the steppe. And maybe you could give like your best like 30 seconds of like what this film's about.
Okay, so this film is about
Just brush over like 4,000 years of history.
briefly like a kind of historical legend of a steppe queen, Tomiris.
Yeah.
It's Tomiris in the English spelling, but in the movie
Right.
they get this little in there. So
Yeah.
I'm going to try and do that the whole time. But she was like a steppe queen of the Mesagate, which
Yeah.
are a Iranian-speaking subgroup of the larger Scythian or Scythian nomadic peoples that lived on the steppe. And steppe culture is like kind of very similar, even though there's a bunch of different language groups and a bunch of different people groups within the steppe culture. And they're essentially all pastoral nomads, meaning they move frequently and they herd animals. And
Yeah.
there's a bunch of Greek legends about Tomiris, and Herodotus is probably the most famous. And it's kind of like I would guess it's like a fictionalized or like a legendized type of historical story that got repeated over and over and over oral tradition and then finally written down by the Greeks.
Sure.
So take the historical aspect with a grain of salt. And the biggest kind of historical issue with the film is that it's in a like archaic form of Turkic language, and the Saka and the Mesagate were like an Iranian speaking folk. So that has caused, in the few reviews we've looked around for, that's caused a little bit of kind of hubbub among a bunch of people groups that we know nothing about. So we won't dive in to say who's right and who's wrong or any of that.
That is not the purpose of this show.
But generally, it's like an epic hero story with, the main protagonist is a female steppe queen, and it follows the same arc as any other hero story.
So another woman kicking ass story that we got this week.
Back to back, hot chicks
Back to
kicking
back.
ass.
Heck yeah. And just an FYI for everyone, this film is available on like digital streaming platforms. So wherever you can purchase digital movies, you should be able to find this one under the foreign section, The Legend of Tomiris.
I paid a lot
yeah.
for it, man.
Did you?
Yeah, so the HD version was $15.99 on Vudu,
Really?
and to rent it was $4.99. So
Whoa. So on
I'm-
iTunes, I paid $9.99.
okay,
Well, this was exciting because this is totally like the kind of stuff you're into.
yeah. From like a history perspective, it is like
For sure.
freaking Viagra for my history boner, dude. It was just like all the types of cultures that I'm extremely interested in because there's not really much information about them because they didn't have a writing system.
Right.
This movie kind of shows a lot of that culture, and I'm guessing they got a lot of the details about, you know, the attire they were wearing and
Like day-to-day living.
yeah, some of the
Stuff like
day-to-day
that.
stuff. I'm guessing they got a lot of that from the archaeology in the region because Kazakhstan
Yeah.
has like a pretty insanely rich archaeological culture with Kurgans. Kurgans are like Scythian steppe people burials.
Sure.
That often, when they get sealed up, freeze in the permafrost because it's such a cold climate. So
Yeah.
preservation is like fantastic. And
Yeah.
they even do a Kurgan burial in this movie, which was awesome.
Oh, sweet. Okay. Well, if anyone hasn't noticed, El Toddo's super interested in this subject matter. So let's start
And
with
I didn't
you
even
first.
pick this movie, by the way.
You didn't. I picked
Yeah.
this one.
I said, let's do something foreign, and we started looking around, and you found
Yeah.
this, and I was like, I was probably more excited to watch this movie than any other movie we've done all year, simply because of the subject matter, because I'm so into it.
All right. Well, expand on that. So after your first watch, what were your thoughts on The Legend of Tomiris? Tomiris.
All right, so I have to put everything into two different buckets, right? So we got
Okay.
the storyline of the movie bucket where the classic hero arc is in play that we've seen in a million movies, and
Right.
that side of it was fine. You know, like I didn't really expect anything that didn't happen. It was pretty much right down the line with your standard kind of hero arc storylines. But what I loved about it was like the attention to detail on the steppe culture stuff. So like the hats that they're wearing, all of like the really badass archery and horse archery stuff,
Yeah.
the kind of nods to the archaeological community in that region with the Kurgan burial of the husband.
Okay.
I forget his name.
I'm going to come back and ask you about that because I thought that was interesting too. And I don't know a whole lot about this region, so.
Yeah, and then from like a military history perspective, some of like the details of the warfare stuff,
Uh-huh.
I just absolutely loved it. Like,
Oh, wow. So even that.
yeah, like the feigned retreats and like the game plan in the big pitch battle at the end of the movie, how she
Yeah.
draws it out on the sand,
Right.
and like there is when the Khwarezmians show up and they lure them into that valley and then flank them from both sides, like all of those little things,
Yeah.
I was just like eating it up, man.
Oh, cool.
I loved it so much. It's really, I don't feel like I'm knowledgeable enough to say whether things or not are accurate,
Sure.
but it's definitely way closer than some of the other movies that I've seen
Uh-huh.
that do deal briefly with steppe culture.
Right.
And I just
Was this the first film you've ever seen that's directly addressing the steppe culture on film?
I guess okay. So there's a Russian movie called Mongol.
Oh, right.
That's actually really good, and that's about Temujin Genghis Khan. That's
Uh-huh.
like his whole life story, and
Yeah.
there's some pretty badass warfare in the end of that movie. But it is like so far from accurate that it kind of puts you off a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
Like they have like these giant curved, like when Genghis unleashes his full blown heavy cavalry in that movie, they're like straight ninjas mixed with Persian immortals, like with these giant curved blades, and it's just nothing like the tactics that they actually used.
And the Immortals make a brief appearance in this movie too, don't they?
Yeah,
they're a lot more like real world.
Yeah, they're pretty badass in this. They're not like the 300 Immortals. But this movie, I thought, they really paid attention to the details on war tactics and the kind of like the ethos of steppe warfare, which is a thinking man's warfare or a thinking woman's warfare in this sense, that had a lot more to do with exploiting your advantage with horses, because steppe peoples, are raised in the saddle, and I was just blown away. Like some of the stuff when they're flipping backwards and firing backwards after they do their feigned retreats, and when they're having like their little archery competition, like I just loved all that, dude. I was just eating it up, man.
So Drew done good this week. Drew done good.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. What did I think of this movie?
Sorry.
I really liked it. I thought the production quality was really, really high.
Surprisingly high.
Yeah, that this is like nowhere near a Hollywood film. Their budget must have been pretty decent, though, I would imagine. Probably the worst, like, special effects use was during a sequence involving, like, an elk, I think, in the beginning. That was a little off, but, like, it's a minor criticism. I loved all the practicality of this movie. Like, I loved using lots and lots of extras. I loved how it appeared to be shot almost entirely, like, on location. And I think they filmed throughout a bunch of different areas in Kazakhstan, so that was cool.
It's a big-ass country, so I'm sure they had plenty to choose from.
Just, like, beautiful plains and, like, hills. It's just really, really nice to look at. And I loved all the, like, the detail in, like, costume design. I loved the practical sets in the surrounding areas, like, with the like, domiciles they're living in and, like, the hearths, stuff like that. I thought was really, really cool. And although we can't really understand the language, we're watching this all with subtitle. Like, the acting was there, at least visually, in terms of how people on screen express themselves emotionally, like visually on their faces and their actions. So everything came across really, really authentically, and I was just surprised at how well done this film was. And I was kind of nervous because what was the film that we did where the Legion, I think it was, where we saw the trailer and we were like, oh, that looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the movie was awful.
Awful.
So I was like, I hope we didn't watch all of the greatest moments in the trailer. So when I got through the first hour, I was like, okay, good. We're like in a solid, well-made, movie going in. So that was exciting. I don't know. I just like how you don't hear a lot about stories like this that deal with a very particular ethnic group or culture, and you get to really sit in the spotlight with them, even though it's kind of based off loosely like legend and historical, like mythological writing, I guess you could almost say. Herodotus, we can't really tell how much is accurate and not.
It's kind of like the Bible, right? There are little elements of it that did happen and are historical events, but the details is, like they were weaving stories back then too.
Right, but what it does is it gives you kind of a leeway to tell a good story, like regardless of the accuracy of the history.
Yeah.
So I thought that was exciting. My one criticism of this film is that it was a bit long for me, and at times it felt long. And I guess, like, my total ignorance of the culture and, like, this region, I found it hard to follow a bit in terms of, like, the politics between the different tribes of the steppe. Although it's a film that I would go back and rewatch because I feel like I'd be able to understand it a little more after watching it a first time. So, yeah, that's a minor criticism for me, but I think on the whole, I thought this movie was really impressive.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed by it. And then, like, so this takes place, like, what, 2,600 years ago?
Yeah.
Even with whatever written sources from that time, it's like you really can't believe too much when you're dealing with this deep of antiquity. So, like, that does give them the leeway to just kind of, like, weave this legendary story, right? It's almost the same as, like, a Troy type situation, and
Yeah, exactly.
dealing with any of Homer's stuff.
And I think the perfect analogy you made was the Bible. It's like there are little snippets of historical truth throughout and other things you're not so sure about. But from my viewpoint, that's a little less important. It's kind of more about, does the story work and am I invested in the characters?
Yeah.
And in this film, I felt like while it was long at times and I did feel like I was kind of slogging through at moments, it also benefited the story because by the end, you're totally invested in Tomiris
Oh, yeah.
and like her journey and where she ends up. And you're totally rooting for her by the end of the film. And like you're literally able to spend time with her from her birth throughout the rest of her life. And you don't get a whole lot of films that do that, or at least do it as well as this film did, I think.
I feel like it was a really long story.
Yeah.
And they felt the need to spend the time, and I kind of like that. Like how shitty would it have been if they glossed really quickly over the first two versions of her, right? The 10-year-old and the 15-year-old.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of like that they stayed with the 15-year-old one for a while, and even she had her little kind of arc, right?
Yeah, for
she
sure.
Like trained up and got badass, and then got frustrated with hiding out in the forest and left, and then her whole kind of tribe gets wiped out, and she comes and kills all the guys that did it, and then, you know, she's like wounded. Like I enjoyed that they spent the time to tell the whole stories, and like when Homeboy goes to Babylon, like they could have done that quickly, right? They could have done that in a few minutes, but they spent the time to make it like an extra 20 minutes of the movie.
Right. And like you're literally on by the point of the film where they're battling the Persians at the end, you've literally spent her whole lifetime. Like you spent with her from her birth to that point as an adult leading her tribe. And that works extremely well in this case. And I think so before we started recording, I mentioned to you that it resembles like the epic classic films that you see from the 50s and 60s. And a film that I pointed out was Lawrence of Arabia. And like this film checks a lot of those classic epic boxes where it is shot mostly on location. It has massive amounts of extras. It's able to do like the long form narrative storytelling where you're able to follow a character very, very closely from birth to their like climax in the story. And you just don't see a lot of films like that these days anymore. And that was really refreshing.
Yeah. From a story standpoint, I don't know. I haven't read Herodotus. I don't really know the Tomiris legend at all.
Yeah.
But the whole first half of the movie is extremely similar to the story of Genghis Khan, Temujin.
Really?
Yeah. Like,
oh, okay.
It's very, very similar. Like with her clan getting attacked and betrayed, and her father getting killed, and her running away, and her living with another tribe for a long time, and then her coming back and unifying her people. Like that's like exactly what's in the Secret History of the Mongols about Temujin's early life.
Oh, wow. Which
is interesting because while the Mongols are quite a bit farther east and I guess different than the Saka, it's almost like I feel like this movie was getting at, this is like the steppe story. It kind of like goes beyond of just the Masagate or the Saka. It's like this is like the steppe's ultimate legend, and I felt like they were kind of retelling that.
Okay.
But they might have bitten quite a bit of the framework from Secret History of the Mongols.
Huh, that's interesting. But in terms of like, so two cultural groups, they're just completely different.
I wouldn't say they're completely different at all. I would say they speak different languages.
Yeah. But like a shared culture, sort of? Just due to like the nomadic aspect of that?
Yeah, it's like the steppe stretches from freaking Hungary to Manchuria. It's like the longest unbroken unit of geography on the planet, I believe. Like the longest stretch of ecologically similar land.
Right.
And I'm quite a bit of an environmental determinist, so I kind of view it as like if doesn't really matter what language you speak or what, quote unquote ethnicity you think of, I kind of view the whole step as like a shared culture.
Gotcha.
Okay, like here's an analogy, right?
Okay.
It's kind of a clunky one, but so like Americans, right?
Dirty, filthy people.
No.
Yeah.
So we're Americans, right? And we live in a big ass continent. It's 3,000 miles across.
Right.
And our shared culture is that we're Americans, and however you want to break that down, whatever. But if you go regionalized, people view themselves as different, right? State to state. So that's kind of the way.
Or even like within the state itself.
And that's not saying that they were politically unified at all. I mean, it's more or less like you have to live certain types of ways in certain environments.
Yeah.
And until you get to like fairly diversified levels of culture, like you get with agricultural societies, then you start to see major quote unquote cultural differences, right?
Cool. Okay.
So I would say, yeah, they're not far off culturally from Mongols, even though they might ethnically be a different people. It's like a shared life, right? Or
Gotcha.
shared culture. The way of the horse, the way of the nomads, raising animals, the archery stuff, like the warfare. It's all very similar across most of the steppe.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and again, this is my ignorance of the whole steppe culture, quote unquote. I'm very unfamiliar with that region.
I am too. I've just become quite interested in the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, well,
I never studied it in college or anything. I would have loved to.
Oh yeah, it's just getting a little taste of that region in this film. It's really, really interesting. Just all the political dynamics between different groups within that whole broader region, and I don't know. I just found it fascinating. Let me ask you specifically about the story, though. The story of the main character.
Okay.
So, in terms of her arc, what specific element of her journey was there any specific element of her journey towards like the very end of the film that caught your attention or that you appreciated watching the film?
So I enjoyed her childhood and her kind of coming to age or coming to know herself portion of the movie.
Right.
And when she fucks those dudes up in the forest, that was like one of my favorite parts of the movie. I was like, oh, that's so awesome.
This is the teenage version of the character, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
She kills like, 3-4 dudes, right?
Yeah.
And it's awesome. But I'll say the part that I liked the most was when she first commands the army, when she gets the tribes to kind of rally behind her to take on the Khwarezmians.
Yeah.
That was my favorite pinnacle of her kind of life and career that we see. Because after that, she's like a queen, basically, right?
Yeah, it's before she gets married, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is like the first major battle scene that she leads, she takes command of.
Right.
Right? And she's like, look, we're gonna bum rush them on the front, and then we're gonna retreat, and they're gonna follow us into this valley, and then we're gonna flank them from both sides, and then we're gonna turn and hit them back right on the front and hit them from 3 sides. I was just like drooling, dude, at how fucking much I love that shit. That was definitely my favorite kind of like rite of passage, I guess, for her character in the movie. Because after that, she was just like a noble queen, right?
Right. This is just kind of like a nerdy question to ask you, but in terms of their battle technology with like the weaponry they were using and the use of metals, is that pretty accurate in terms of like?
So I think
from what you know, at least.
So this takes place 600 BC, right?
Is this like Bronze Age? This
is after. So this is like 6-ish hundred years.
Yeah. Okay.
After the quote unquote Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah.
But there's like quite a gradient there,
Right. Yeah.
It's not like one day everybody stopped using bronze and started using iron,
exactly.
because like they kind of play into that when the Bactrian refugees show up. And they're like, we know how to make iron, like, check out this sword. Yeah. It's badass. And that, I don't know if it's accurate from a time period standpoint, but I appreciate it because it shows that, like, metallurgy trickled, right? It trickled across the world. It wasn't like a quick thing. So I imagine they're using bronze most of the time.
So that's what I was actually
in the
alluding to in
beginning
my
of
question.
this
Though.
movie.
Like that's what I was referring to, the moment where you have those refugees and they're like, "Look, we have this cool tech."
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, yeah. To me, it seemed like those were like iron weapons that they were like trying to sell them on or something like that.
Yeah, and then they play that up, right? Because when they're
Yeah.
preparing to fight the Persians, she's like, "I need that everybody and every bit of iron that we can make. We need to make it." And they only they only make enough suits of I think it's the laminar or laminar. I'm not sure the type of armor, the scaled armor that overlaps. And they remember the scene where the guy comes in. He's like, "Check this shit out! Like it's
Right?
badass."
Yeah.
And they only have enough material to make armor for 100 soldiers to wear it into battle, right? So when that's part of the big part of their Cyrus game plan is like we're going to hit the front, and then we're going to back off, and then we're going to hit the flanks, and then we're going to come charging into the front again, and then we're going to use our Iron 100 as a battering ram to get through to Cyrus. Like, I loved it, dude. Like, I love that they spent the time to show the armor and do the little bit where the guy's like, "I know how to make iron," you know?
Yeah.
Because those are big, those are big elements of history, and whether or not it did happen at that point in that region, I don't give a fuck, you know?
Yeah. No, it's fair. I'm totally on the same page with you. And then, real briefly, I guess we've already been well into spoiler territory by now, but I do want to ask you about the end a little bit. So you can keep it as vague as you want or specific as you want. I guess I'll leave it up to you. But where the story ends and that whole sequence, and I think you know what I'm talking about regarding like a bag.
Yeah.
What did you think of that? The way they ended the film and maybe even like that very last sequence that we get.
So it's hard to not poke at the final stuff, right? Because it is Cyrus, who's like a pretty famous figure in history.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But for the whole arc of the movie, it kind of has to be that triumphant, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll put it this way: I enjoyed everything visually.
Yeah.
Of that, like the whole final battle, and the dude who's rushing him, that's her slave boy, right? That she rescues from the Khwarezmians.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And he's a total badass.
Yeah.
Which is cool. But I guess I liked the visuals so much that I don't really care about how kind of predictable and how on the nose the ending is.
Okay, gotcha.
But the bag and shit, I love that, dude. And like the heads on the horses when they're riding around.
Yeah.
I love that shit.
Man. All right, well, cool. And I agree with you too. Like, where else is a story like this going to end up with, you know, other than like sitting on the top of a hill triumphantly, like, you know, after battle. So,
and yeah, the ending, that's where it really does seem propaganda-y.
Yeah.
Right? Like, me and you don't know a goddamn thing about Central Asian politics.
Right.
So we're not going to comment on whether or not it is. But it does feel kind of like a propaganda film, especially at the ending.
Yeah, we're trying to innocently just discuss this as a film strictly. But all right, let's try and slog through what I think is going to be the hardest thing to talk about, because all of the cast lists for this film are awful. But
yeah, there's only 12 people.
Yeah,
on IMDb.
It's really, really hard, and even like the names of the characters within the film for me were kind of hard to keep track of. But we'll do our best here. So let's start obviously at the top with Tomiris herself. She's played by 3 different actresses at different periods of life. So like we have the child version, the teenage version, and then the full-on adult version of the character. You could break this down separately by the 3, or you could just do this as an overall like believability of the character as one person. How did the performances come across to you?
Quite believable.
Okay, cool.
You know, the 10-year-old version of her was pretty good. It wasn't long, right? It was only maybe 10, 15 minutes. And then I did like the teenage version of her a lot.
Yeah. She was probably my favorite.
Yeah, me too. And then when it switched
did that confuse you too?
I was like, is that her? Like, I couldn't tell on if they changed actors or not, because they did look extremely similar, right?
Yeah, yeah.
and I couldn't tell if they had changed or not. And I eventually forgot and stopped caring.
Yeah. It's interesting because there was a point where I was so invested in the teenage version of the character, and then when they swapped her out, I was like, no, because I was already so invested.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn, so now I got to start this all over again. But then, yeah, like 5 minutes later, you totally forget about it. But what I really liked was, like, there was 3, I guess, major themes for each of the actresses playing her. So, like, the child actress, she has to deal with the whole loss of her father element. So that's, like, her major kind of acting moment, is to like really dive into the emotional weight that Tomiris experiences after the death of her father, because it shapes her entire life, like, in this story. So that was really, really awesome to see, and I thought she did a great job. Like, she's being dragged away, watching her father, like, fall to the ground in
Fight
an attempt
till
to
the
escape.
end, dude.
Yeah, and it's just, like, really, really well done and really well acted. Then the teenage version of the character comes about, and she's kind of lost. Like, she's searching for, like, where is her place in this land, and, like, what is her role. Her people are gone. Like, she has no connection to them at this point, and she's kind of wandering around. And I really identify with that struggle she has, because, I mean, any person can feel that way, even in your everyday normal life. And I just loved the way she's able to, like, balance kind of this, like, vulnerability, but also the strength, because she has some really badass fight sequences too that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But yeah, just, like, visually, the way that actress pulls off the character at that moment in her life, I loved the balance between, like, that vulnerability and almost that, like, on the verge of innocence still, but then breaking into adulthood, while also coming into this, like, woman kicking ass persona.
Yeah.
That was really interesting to me. And then lastly, with the adult version of the character, she's just full on badass. So she's like, just the way she, like, looks off camera, like, she has that glare where you just do not want to fuck with somebody like that. And then you get to see, like, the extent of her training once she gets into, like, the other clans, and she picks up, like, do you remember the clan name? The clan of just
No.
bunch of warrior fucking badass women.
No, I don't remember.
That's probably my
which-
favorite whole part of the film, was when she, like, gets almost inducted into that group, and you get to see how they operate.
Yeah, that part was interesting too, because it was, like, exclusively women,
Yeah.
and even the kids were women. But then they had, like, a chief dude.
Yeah. He was kind of, like, in charge, but, like, from afar, I guess. It was kind of weird.
Yeah, but then, like, kind of as time went on, there was, like, all of a sudden there was dudes all over the place.
Yeah.
So it was a bit interesting. It was almost like a sorority that she got adopted into in the beginning, and then they all kind of matured out of it and went back to
Yeah.
living with the men.
Right.
But Tomiris, played by, what is it, Almira Turson,
Mm-hmm.
she is pretty badass in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, from an action standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
I read that she took archery and horse riding,
Oh, yeah.
a bunch of lessons to film this.
And also, from my understanding, she's not an actress. She is a professional psychologist.
That's pretty interesting.
So that adds to, like, the badassery of...
And on the
Who
wiki
she is.
page, it said they looked over 15,000 women
Audition for the role?
this role,
Good.
which is pretty insane.
Wow.
But yeah, I was so bought in to her.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously you have to be for a film like this that is centered around her. But going back to my comment about her getting into, like, the clan of badass women, that brings up probably my second favorite character in the whole film, Sardana, who is another, like, female badass played by Aizan League. I don't know. I'm totally killing that name.
She's awesome, dude.
She was so good, and I love the relationship that her and Tomiris develop. It's like this total sisterly bond they got going on, and in a sense, she's almost like her right-hand person at a point where she completely trusts her, and I don't know, they just develop this, like, chemistry together, and it's like two warriors going out that have been going at it and have been at the pinnacle of mastering battle. Like it's really, really cool to see.
She's got such a wicked fight scene at the end.
Yeah.
That was probably like the single longest choreographed fight scene in the movie, right?
Yeah, and what was cool is when they're first introduced to each other, there is kind of that like antagonism going on because they don't know. She doesn't know what Tomiris is all about, and she seems a bit concerned or pessimistic about her being there in the first place. But then once that develops, it's really, really entertaining to see, and I love their dynamic. Was there a favorite character for you that stood out that comes to mind? I know that the list is really, really bare here, but even if you can give like a general,
I mean, my two favorite characters
who the character
were
was
Tomiris and Sardana by far.
Okay, cool.
And then how do you say his name? Ghassan Masood. He plays Cyrus.
Right.
I thought he totally looked the part really well.
Yeah.
And for how like grand Cyrus the Great is in kind of historical lore, that they really went for it. But
yeah,
that stuff was like a little intense, over the top.
Well, yeah, I guess what they had going for them is like when I heard the name Cyrus the Great, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's what I expect when I hear Cyrus the Great.
Yeah,
like someone like that.
So I got an interesting question. So like the movie 300 that deals with Persians later, a couple centuries later than this, but
yeah,
that movie is like almost graphic novel, comic book style.
It is definitely graphic novel style because it's based off of a graphic novel.
And super fictionalized, you know, but
yep, very stylized.
The fact that it has just that little hint of historical act of like something did happen, right?
Yeah.
Makes it, I believe, like I almost like this type of fiction way more than full-blown crazy fiction, right?
Gotcha, okay.
But what I'm thinking is like a movie like there's been, you know, ancient Greek movies made forever, and they all kind of have that this cool little, like, yeah, something did happen that inspired this story, and throw the details out the window.
Right.
And this movie totally has that.
Yeah, I think this is like, in terms of the visual elements of this movie, it's a lot more real world, set in the real world. But yeah, I think you're picking up on something 100% right, where it's like the themes of the story and the broader legendary aspect of it, you can almost put pound per pound up against 300. It's the same kind of narrative storytelling, I guess, based off of legend.
And all our damn stories are all epic hero stories. You know, everything is.
Right. You know, it would be cool to see a film like this, though, told in that very stylized way. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
But still, like, I think the look of the film I really appreciate, because it's almost like you can go as legendary as you want it with your story, but if it looks authentic, I think that's what gets people the most. That's an easier sell, I think, than for 300. Even though that a lot of people saw it and a lot of people like it, it's a lot more believable than a film like 300 when you have like these giants fighting, these armies of Spartans, and it's just balls to the walls, bonkers. But
yeah, that one definitely has a more mystical kind of thing. There's not really much mysticism in this at all, right? It's like totally hyper realistic, except for her dream world.
Yeah,
where she fights her on fire winged lion.
Yeah, let me ask you about that real quick, because I know we're on character, but
okay, yeah.
How did you take that?
I really don't know. I mean, I think it's like just her inner conquering, right? It's like that's like the metaphor is like she's conquering this inner beast.
Yeah,
and it was like kind of cheesy the first time the lion shows up because she's a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like not as cheesy the next time, and then the final time it shows up, it was like actually a pretty sweet scene, I thought.
I thought that was the best use of like special effects in the whole film.
Yeah, it was definitely better than the elk in the beginning.
Yeah. They were like, if we had to divide our budget on this, it's like 90 and then 10%.
Any other characters you could think of? Argun is like Tomiris' husband.
Yeah, he was really cool.
What's his name? Adil Akhmetov.
Yeah. I love the kid actor that plays the slave that she picks up.
I don't even remember his name.
I don't remember his name either. Sorry. And the other character I really liked was the actor who played, or the character of her dad, Tomiris' father. I thought he did a great job of playing the like noble leader that also is in love with his daughter, although he was like really stoked to try and have a son. But I loved watching them on screen together when he's teaching her like how to fight and kind of passing down his knowledge. I kind of gravitate towards characters like that. I just think they're really cool.
Yeah, I wish he was listed on the cast. I can't even remember his name in the movie.
Yeah, me either. But shout out to him. But that's all I got for character, unless there was something else you had.
Yeah, I liked. He's not on here either, but the guy who played the Persian emissary.
Oh yeah, another. I think everyone in this film was really well cast.
It all looked the part to me.
Right down to like the scribe writing, like kind of narrating the legend.
Yeah, like 1,500 years later almost.
Yeah.
Ibn al something.
Right.
I want to find that guy's account and read it.
Yeah.
But like
Right?
I appreciated just casting wise how it was like this big mishmash of people, right? The Persian dudes looked like Persian dudes, and the steppe peoples were highly variable, which is quite accurate, I think, for that time period.
Right.
And they did that in Waited for the Barbarians too, right? They had the steppe folks. Some of them were very East Asian looking. Some of them had like blonde hair and shit.
Yeah.
And they did that in this movie too, and I kind of like that because it's like the ultimate in-between land on the planet, right? Like it's in between the two most different cultures on the planet, right? The East and the West.
Yeah.
And it spans that whole thing, so you're going to get like this massive gradient of peoples.
Right.
From a genetic standpoint, and I like that I believed everybody in there.
Yeah, me too.
To me it looked cool. I could be way off, but I was totally bought into all the characters. Like I believed that they were alive in that time period.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to the movie we did last week. Like I really believed that these were all just coming out of the first major Dark Age peoples after the Bronze Age.
Like you didn't buy Chris Pine 100 years ago. It's
yeah, not even 100. He couldn't even do 100. These people are doing 2,600, yo.
All right. Let's move on here. Here's another element of this film that I thought was really cool, and it was the cinematography, but more importantly, not only the shots themselves, but shooting on location. And I'm going to emphasize that so much because for me, I don't care what kind of story you're telling. Anytime you can set something in the real world and go outside and just start rolling and capture real landscapes, I'm always going to gravitate towards that aspect of movie making over green screen. Like, I understand if you're shooting like an Avatar film that takes place on a completely fabricated set.
Yeah.
That's fine, but like something like this that's based loosely on history and and a region, I love the fact that they were able to go out and shoot in that area.
Yeah, it's largely a geographic story, right?
Yeah.
And they really put the effort in to pay tribute to that geography.
Right. And I mean, there's not a whole lot going on in terms of like, you know, topography or anything, but the open land of the steppe and just looking across all of the plains, it was beautifully captured on film. And I don't know, that was really refreshing to me. It was because you don't get that a whole lot at all. And I mean, I don't know if they were using anamorphic, but could you imagine this film being shot in like IMAX?
Yeah.
Like with that scenery? That would have been...
Some of the drone shots when they were riding...
Oh, yeah.
Were like so epic, right? Like they panned out so far on some of these scenes, and there's just nothing.
Yeah.
Right? And those are legit, right? They're not...
There's a lot of open real estate.
Yeah, definitely. But they're not like there's not a point on the screen, or at least I didn't notice it, where it turns from a real landscape to digital, right?
Yeah.
Those were all legit shots, like the when they fight the Khwarezmians.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they probably had, 300 to 500 people out there riding horses and
Oh, yeah.
chariots and shit.
Yeah.
And they were filming that with a drone, like, from the valley. Like, dude, it was so awesome.
Yeah. And it goes back to that whole thing I was saying about the epic, the classic epic. You see that was just main staple stuff to see in films of this scale. And we don't get that a whole lot anymore. And some of my favorite shots were the ones during battle where the camera's zoomed in, almost like in telephoto, and then the frame is just filled with bodies, like, slashing at each other.
Yeah.
I love shots like that because it just emphasizes the scale, but also, like, the tangible quality to the people on screen.
I really loved the battle against the Persians and how they kept, like, zooming out to the full battlefield, which was, like, you know, the front was, like, multiple kilometers wide or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was digital. It probably was, right? But it was...
Yeah, probably.
Like, that's probably the only major battle part that was digital, and I really enjoyed it.
But, like, even that aside, the amount of real people they had on screen at a given point in time was massive.
Yeah.
And I also loved, there were a couple sequences where you just have a line of horsemen lined up
Yeah.
on screen at the same time. Those were, I think, some of the coolest use of, like, having these massive casts, was when you're able to, like, see them all riding horseback on the frame at the same time. Oh, man.
So, like, when they unite the two groups and they're going to bring Tomiris back to let her rule her people again,
Yeah.
when those two armies line up, right? It's the Mesagetai with some Khwarezmian dudes,
Yes.
and then the other two tribes that have unified. Like, there was literally all those dudes were there.
Yeah.
Like, that whole sequence when she goes up and she calls out Khortun and Kavaz for killing her dad, you know, and gives her whole speech.
Yeah.
Like, all those dudes were really there.
Yeah.
And that, like, there was easily a couple hundred dudes on each side, right?
Yep.
And you just got to appreciate, well, maybe they have lots of horses and dudes that look the part in Kazakhstan. Maybe they had that working in their favor.
Man, I'll tell you this, because I actually was an extra in a film once.
Oh, nice.
Batman versus Superman. This was like 2016, I think.
Really?
But if you put out any kind of ad where they're like, we need you to show up and be an extra in a movie, like, people are going to show up. But I'm surprised that they don't do that more often, because I guess, well, at least in the Hollywood system, it's broken up by, like, you have extras that are people that show up that don't get paid.
Yeah,
and then you have extras that show up and get paid. That can be, like, part of the Actors Guild. And so I'm assuming all of the people that they had in this film, because they're doing so much actual, like, physical stuff on
horse
screen.
riding was definitely on
And horse
there.
riding,
You
for
have
sure.
to know how to ride a horse.
So, like, I could understand maybe, like, in terms of logistics, that's hard to pull off nowadays, but I just think it's so cool when movies can do that.
Yeah, me too.
I'd prefer that over, you know, any kind of, like, CGI any day.
It's the little details like that, right, that make me not care that much that I know this. I've heard the story before, you know?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think for me that was probably my favorite part of the whole film, is just the production quality was so high.
From like a filmmaking standpoint, I really appreciated the warfare. Just like all of the horse shots and the archery from the horses, I liked a lot. But the sword fighting was so good, and like from the beginning on, it wasn't like there was just a couple. They were all pretty sweet. Like the scene where Argun gets ambushed, you know, in his tent.
Yeah.
Like that sword fight was awesome. Like 10 dudes. 10 on
They're
10
like
in a tent.
up from the top of the tent too.
Dude, it was so good. And then there's the scene when Tomiris' dad gets taken out in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that, like, when dudes were getting stabbed, it really looked like they were getting stabbed.
Oh,
and it
yeah.
looked like they were getting stabbed with bronze weapons, right? It wasn't like fucking stomach through the gut all the way down to the wrist or the pommel, you know what I mean? And then
Right,
pull it
yeah.
out all clean. It was like stab the guy and it only went in like 4 inches. And there was like a bunch of that.
Yeah,
Of
for
like
sure.
brutal stabs in the neck and the shoulder where it doesn't go deep in, like in Troy when Achilles jumps up and sticks his sword down the shoulder blade of Boagrius and pulls it out all in
Yeah.
one motion, and it looks super fake.
Yeah, none
like-
of that titanium bronze.
Yeah. And in this, it was just like there were so many stabbings and so many gruesome freaking violent acts that looked really, really bad. Like bad as in they looked real.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, too, that you brought that up, because I wouldn't necessarily say that this film is gory either, though.
I thought
It
they
ju-
did justice to the gore and during all the fight scenes.
Like, for me, I think it was at the end where I was like, oh, shit. In terms of, like, dismemberment or anything like that, I didn't see a whole lot. But, again, you just said, like, bronze weapons, you're not going to expect a lot of that anyways. But, yeah, I did, like, I guess you can also give your hat off to sound design, too, because I think that's a lot of, it adds to a lot of that action going on with,
Yeah.
like, the stabbing sounds and the clashing of swords and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure that's a nightmare when you're doing sequences like this. They probably don't even use anything that's recorded on location.
Yeah.
It's all overdubbed. But yeah, I think we're in agreement. This
It's
is one of
definitely
the
a-
best parts of the movie.
Yeah, definitely the strong suit. The detail, you know, the costume design detail, and like the full commitment to the geography and capturing the geography.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
just a bravo from me.
Yeah, me too. Let's talk a little bit about the score. Let me ask you, well, does it work for you or not in this movie?
I mean, it was a little over the top. It worked in sections,
Yeah.
and it was kind of present the whole time.
Yeah,
but-
I think so too.
It didn't bother me as much because I'm interested in the subject matter. So I'll end up giving it half a point
Yeah. Same with me.
for score.
Mm-hmm.
It was very predictable and very, on the nose with the tone of the whole movie, like this ancient epic kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, there were moments that worked, and a lot of them had to do with like smaller moments, more intimate moments in the film, but also just because I'm like a snob with this stuff, like I noticed that a lot of it's probably like sample mixes and stuff. It's not done, with live instrumentation. It's all kind of computer based composing, which is fine. But that was also something I kind of noticed where I was like, okay, maybe they decided to pull back a little bit on the budget for the score, which is fine because everything else we got was great. So yeah, not a whole lot in terms of
It's what
like
you
having-
would expect, right?
yeah, having real strong feelings with
It's
the
an
score.
ancient epic, and it's exactly the type of score that you imagine it is.
For sure, yeah. All right, we've reached that point of the show. We're starting to wrap up here. Let's get into our love-hates, and I'll start with you.
So I got 3 loves.
Okay.
I loved Sardana and Tomiris.
Mm-hmm.
I love hot chicks kicking ass, man. I can't get enough of it. And they are so badass in this movie that it's like a different level. It's like different than the hot blonde assassin, right?
Yo, yeah.
It's a total like ancient warrior kind of hot, and I love it. And then I love the subject matter.
Atomic Blonde BC.
Well, like what's her name? Charlize had a little bit of that in Old Guard.
She does, that's right.
Yeah, it's like same time period, right?
Yeah,
That she's supposed to have come out of.
right.
Imagine her playing Tomiris.
Oh, shit. Now that I'm thinking, how nuts would that be if that character she played, like her original character in that story, is this character?
It might be based off the same legend. What's
That's
Andromache?
Yeah.
It might be. Who knows?
Wow. Really cool.
That kind of like, Scythian steppe Amazon woman thing.
Yeah.
And then we got a theme here. Wonder Woman has the whole deal going on too.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that.
Yeah.
But more, please.
Yeah. Yes, please. Please, sir, I want some more.
Yeah. And the other part I love is the geography and the time period. Like I'm just, as you can tell, I'm totally obsessed with that part of the world and that time period, and really not specific to that time period, but really just that whole steppe culture. I'm super, super intrigued by it because we learned absolutely nothing about it growing up.
Yeah.
And what I hate about the movie is, I don't know, probably that it definitely rubbed some people the wrong way, and we might willfully be advertising a propaganda movie. I have no idea if we are or not. The fact that we don't know anything about the politics behind any of this
Full disclosure
makes me a
of our
little
ignorance.
nervous. Yeah, full disclosure of ignorance. Then yeah, that's probably what I hate the most, is that the stuff that I'm reading online is like, oh, it's a very knee-jerky kind of movie for some people, and that sucks. As fans who don't know anything about it, I friggin' was totally digging it, man.
Sweet.
What about you?
Let's see. For loves, I'm going to go with the entire production of this film. I love movies that are almost like callbacks to those classic epics. I love films like Lawrence of Arabia, and like even more recently I'd put into that company of films like The Mummy, the Brendan Fraser Mummy films, like the first one. That was almost like Warner Brothers going back to those like epic roots. So when I saw this film, it was a pleasant surprise with how big it was and how massive the story was and the use of practical effects and people. So that just totally tugged on my heartstrings. And then in terms of hates, they're not really like hates. They're just kind of, I guess it's kind of the baggage you expect from epic films. Like at points, it did seem like it was a bit drawn out and long. There were moments where like special effects and CGI didn't work for me. Little parts of the score, but I mean, this is all like kind of nitpicky, and you know, I didn't go into this film expecting it to be perfect, but they were just kind of little observations that I had. So, you know, on the whole, I enjoyed it. So, where would this rank on your bongo meter? What kind of score are you slapping on this? The Legend of Tomiris.
So I will say I expected it to be really bad. Like even after watching the trailer, just because we got hoodwinked with the Legion. When, watched the
We got
trailer on
burned.
that, and
Yeah.
I have so much kind of obsession about ancient history that I was expecting quite a big letdown, and it didn't let me down at all on like scratching that history itch for me.
Yeah.
And I know details and all that may not be wrong, but whatever, it's legend. You know, this is far beyond the time frames when we have a good idea of exactly what happened, right? So
Yeah.
I'm gonna give it 4 bong loads.
Sweet.
So they're definitely getting a point for the acting and the casting because it was spot on with me,
Yeah.
and the fact that they're speaking another language that I've never even heard until I seen this movie.
Yeah.
Both the languages that come across in it, ancient Persian and a form of Turkic, right?
Yeah.
So it's really easy to buy in when you don't speak the language, in my opinion, to the characters. I'm going to give them only half for story because I feel like the first half of the movie was like a direct bite from The Secret History of the Mongols.
Okay.
So they're going to get half on story and then half on score because it was so on the nose. But yeah, 4 bong loads for me.
Okay, cool. I am going to give this film a 3.5.
Okay.
So for me, there was a lot that worked, and like I said, there were moments that dragged a little bit for me. So at times it did feel a bit long. There were just small misses with special effects, and then score. I could tell that they probably didn't want to invest the money into like the production value of the score, which is fine. But that's a 3.5, like an enjoyable 3.5. It's a film that I enjoyed, and it met my expectations, so I was stoked about that. Because the trailer, it looked really, really good in the trailer, and you get what you're sold in the trailer. So anytime a film lines up with what you get in its trailer, I'm all on board for. I'm just glad we didn't get hoodwinked like we did with the Legion.
Fuck
It's
you,
kinda-
Legion.
Oh man. So
I think your review might get some action because there's like nothing about this movie online. It's got no Rotten Tomatoes score. There's like a couple of reviews that I saw that I couldn't really take very unbiasedly. I guess they seemed very reactionary and seemed like they had a lot more motivation than just talking about this movie. So.
yeah, are they all written by like ministers of culture in other countries?
Well, there was like I had a couple ones from Iranian folks that seemed pretty ticked off that they lopped off Cyrus's head, maybe, and that the Saka were an Iranian-speaking people, and then a couple other ones. I did find one from a person in Kazakhstan that was translated into English that basically said, like, you know, this movie is totally missing on a lot of the historical details, but we should all watch it as a people for living in Kazakhstan, and that kind of gets back to like this kind of step story, this, you know, like the former greatness, right?
Yeah.
And it did get a little action. It won, what is this, the Nouveau Genre Great Prize in France,
right?
Les Entranges.
Yeah, and France knows a thing or two about auteur cinema. So.
They liked it.
Yeah, they liked it.
But I enjoyed it, man. It was cool to do a foreign movie. I dig them.
Yeah, so again, we'll throw this out there. If there are any other foreign films that, you know, you guys can recommend that you'd want us to talk about, we're totally open to it. But yeah, that's all I got on this film. It was pleasantly well done, and
I bought it, so I'll probably watch it again.
Yeah, so did I.
It's pretty sweet.
Like we mentioned earlier, you can buy it on any platform that sells digital films, and I think it's even available on disc.
It's definitely cheaper on iTunes than it was on Vudu.
Yeah, I paid $9.99 for it. So if you're into foreign films and you're looking for something to kind of get your feet wet in the culture of the steppe and that whole region, I think this is a good starting place. But that's all I got, man. Anything else you want to...
Shout out Kazakhstan. We got 2 movies in the past, even though one of them isn't really. 2 of them in the past month.
Yeah, you have a lot to be proud of.
And I gotta say, a lot of Borat seems a lot more accurate from a linguistic and a name side than I realized watching it the first time.
Oh, man.
Just like really names, right?
Yeah, that's hilarious.
The whole ministry of... The fact that this movie was made by the Ministry of Culture and Sports for Kazakhstan is pretty crazy. Is this the first government funded movie we've done?
I don't know. I want to say yes. I want to say yes.
It must be.
Although Mulan seems to have some baggage. I don't know.
Yeah, right. The shadow government Mulan.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll stay out of that for now. Let's steer clear. But that's been episode 48 of the Buff and the Blazer podcast. And we will catch you guys next week for a special Thanksgiving episode, I guess. I don't know if special, but we'll get something out for you to listen to after your turkey, I guess.
Yeah.
In the States.
Yeah.
So have a good week, everyone, and we will catch you guys on the next one.
Peace.